Hi, this is a short talk aimed at students on how to do a presentation. You need to organize yourself. What will you be covering? Who's going to be listening? And how much time is there? You also need to decide what tools you're going to use to create your presentation. So obviously, the main thing is, what are you going to talk about? You need to plan, organize the main points you want to cover, and some of these points are really directed at myself. I'm always going into digressions. I often think they're funny and interesting. They can lose the audience. So you do need to be disciplined and try to stick to your agenda, talking about the main things. This includes, so when you did your project, you went, however, on a wild goose chase that wasted weeks of your time, and it was really aggravating. But this is not necessarily something your audience needs to know about. And finally, there is a temptation in presenting your work to go beyond simply saying, here is some work that I did in a professional way and got the following results, and trying to say, look how incredibly clever I am. Now, there may be situations where this is appropriate, like especially if the talk has to do with a job application, but mostly when you're presenting your work to your colleagues, they're also clever, and honestly, they don't want you to be showing off, especially if you show off by being overly complicated and losing them. It's super important to know who's going to be listening and what knowledge do they have already. So, do they care? You've got to somehow convince them that what you're talking about is of interest to them. Probably you're using things that they don't know anything about, and you need to bring them in on this background knowledge as quickly as possible. Now, unfortunately, this again is me, once they get bored, once they've started checking their Facebook or something, that's it. Right? They're not going to pay attention anymore. I suppose if you're very clever, you can organize your talk in such a way that there are kind of recovery points where you switch topics, and there is a hope of catching some of these people back. But you don't want to lose anybody in the first place. And of course, the worst error that especially beginners make is to put up a slide and read it. This is excruciatingly boring, but you can put up your slides and talk about them, which I hope I'm doing right now. You need to keep an eye on the clock. Some PowerPoint and similar tools will actually have a presenter mode in which they show you, what time it is, how long you've been talking, and so on. You need to, I hope, you're able to keep an eye on the time without getting distracted by it when you are delivering your talk. And of course, you must have prepared an appropriate amount of material. People seem paranoid about running out of material. They are so terrified of running out that they over-prepare, they bring too much, and then, they talk beyond the allotted time. This really annoys people, at least for people like myself who are not very patient. So learn to adjust your delivery if necessary. Practice the talk. You can insert jokes if you find that you have got too much time, or insert anecdotes that are kind of relevant but not necessary. If, on the other hand, you find you're running short of time, it should be possible to flick through your slides a bit quicker. You also, in some PowerPoint and similar tools, have the option of hidden slides which you can have in reserve so that you can bring them up and use them if you find that you need to talk for longer. But if you don't need them, you skip over them and the audience doesn't even know they were there. But the main thing, I've had this problem myself of paranoia about running out of material. And sometimes I finished like 15 minutes early and been very embarrassed. I have never, ever in my entire career had someone complain that you didn't talk for long enough. Especially if you're lecturing students, they are only too happy to get out of that lecture hall and go to lunch. Now, how are you going to prepare your slides? I'm a great fan of Apple Keynote, actually, and I think PowerPoint, of course, does all the same things. You shouldn't overdo these animations. I mean, I like them myself, but some of them are ridiculous. Now, for mathematics, again, I'm a Mac fan, and there are many good ways of inserting mathematics into a Keynote presentation on a Mac. I am pretty sure there are similar tools on Windows machines so that you can prepare some formulas using LaTeX and insert them into your presentation relatively neatly. If your talk is heavily mathematical, you might find it better to go entirely into LaTeX, and that is fine, although I must say most presentations I've seen using Beamer are way too long. I'm not sure why. Do not overdo the mathematics. I vividly remember a talk in which this was about an attack on a certain crypto protocol, where they showed the existence of the attack, which is a very mathematical attack. They showed a formula and they said, from this formula you can derive the key or whatever. But they didn't bore us with 2 pages of calculations, though they are almost certainly necessary. They just gave enough information to say, yes, this exists. So always be careful how much detail you include. You need to include graphics in your presentation. Something that grabs the eye like this helps to wake people up, take them away from their phones and back to your talk. And you will need diagrams. So if you're doing a mathematical talk, you will need a diagram like this one. And especially if your talk is being recorded and is going online, you're not going to be allowed to just take a copy. So you have to make your own version. Now, there was a time when tools like Adobe Illustrator could be obtained at an education license really quite cheaply. Unfortunately, it's kind of out of reach now, but there are other quite sophisticated tools that are relatively inexpensive and which are much less painful to use than some of these things that force you to draw your thing on graph paper and then measure a whole bunch of coordinates. So invest in a vector drawing package, learn to use it. There is the dreaded pen tool which is needed to draw curves in a vector package. Once you get the hang of it, it's like swimming, you don't forget it. So do take the effort to learn how to draw diagrams for your mathematical papers. And finally, just keep it nice and short. And that's all I've got.